button once, the light will flash green, and then you're on the mic. So just make sure that it's sort of meant as a hand mic, so you don't need to put it up here. If you hold it just here or in your hand.
Okay. So what do you think is better?
Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here on a Friday evening. I'm very impressed. My name is Sarah Sladen. I'm the Senior Manager for International Youth Development at Interaction, and I also manage the Alliance for International Youth Development. It's a new coalition of 24 leading youth and community development organizations that have come together as a community of practice and an advocacy platform for investments in youth development. We are so pleased to be able to co-host today's Friday Forum with the IDPSA. I'm also an SIS alum, and I'm really happy to finally see one of these downtown instead of having to go up to Town. So these are really great forums, and thank you to Julian again, and thank you so much to our speakers this evening for joining us. I think this is a very timely and interesting topic, and so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julian.
Here's the mic. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I'm Julian. I'm the Student Alumni Coordinator for the International Development Program Student Association, also known as the IDPSA. I just wanted to say a few words on what the IDPSA is. It's an organization run by and for the students of the International Development Program. Our mission is to support, inspire, and foster the growth of future international development practitioners who seek to advance people-centered development by linking critical inquiry with community action. And this event is part of a broader effort of the IDPSA to reach out to alumni and create more connections between student and alumni. Tomorrow we have a community service event for student alumni. It's at the Marion Street International Garden. If you guys are interested in learning more or attending that, you can speak to Christy, who is seated over there. We also have the AIYD Alumni Mentor group on LinkedIn, which I encourage everyone to join. It's a great platform for connecting with your peers and with students and alumni. So with that, I'll turn it to Lubna.
Yeah, I heard it's so sophisticated. You just put it.
Oh.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
All right. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you all for being here with us today of all days. The fact that you show up on Good Friday at all, I mean at 5:30, it's telling me three important things why we are together and three important things that we all share. And the first is that we all recognize that unemployment is a critical, urgent issue that we all are, that the community of practice is invested in. The community of practice with, of course, the practitioners, policymakers, researchers, students, scholars, everybody is aware of the scope of the challenge. And number two, we are here because as big as the challenge is, we are all looking for solutions. And we're looking for solutions to unemployment even when the U.S. market is closed on Good Friday and a lot of other markets. And number three, we all recognize the power of the ICTs, information and communication technologies, or at least we are hoping that the ICTs will help alleviate some of the burdens we all seem to be carrying around as we look, and see that the numbers of the unemployed is challengingly high. So I do understand that you are not here to hear me talk, and that's fair, and we have a fantastic panel for you who will be a fantastic panel contributing to the discussion from different angles. And we're going to follow the order of the biographies that you have. Cecilia Gifford will be the first to talk to us about how to break the rigidities of the market to create opportunities for young people. Deepanvita will be talking to us about how we can use the technologies to facilitate access to resources, a question that is, always important to address. And we also have Samuel Surafel with us, who will be bringing, the issues of health and education, and to talk about how ICTs can facilitate, again, access to resources in these areas. With no further ado, I turn the floor to Cecilia, and please join me to welcome them as they are starting to talk.
Thank you so much, Lubna. And just to second your remarks, thank you everybody for coming today. I'm very impressed that you chose us on a Good Friday or instead of a happy hour. It's great to have you here. My name is Cecilia Guilford. I work at the World Bank. My position is ICT Innovation Specialist. and I focus on open innovation and ICT for skills development and employment, in particular for youth. So why are we talking about ICT? Well, first of all, various studies have shown that ICT in particular, mobile broadband, help to drive GDP growth. So that's a starting point. And it also helps to create employment. ICT is a net employment creator. And sort of the range is between 1.5 to 4.5 indirect jobs. Direct is a little bit less for 10% increase in penetration. So, but more importantly, what ICT does, it reduces the labor market rigidity. It reduces the entry barriers to the labor market, because it is something that in terms of picking up, in particular for youth, it's sort of a skill set that is amenable and something that naturally develops. So youth in particular have an advantage in the ICT sector. This is Meet Nick. Nick has just become a millionaire. He developed, at age 17, he developed an application and Yahoo just bought it. So congrats to Nick. And he taught himself at age 12 to code. So obviously, I mean, Nick, he is in the UK, he's Australian and British, and you know, he had access to schooling, he had access to certain tools and so forth, so kudos to him, but he also didn't come from the most unprivileged of backgrounds. So just to think about, you know, where ICT jobs lie, and this is a rough categorization of how we can think about them in terms of more traditional types of ICT-enabled work to newer types of emerging trends in terms of employment and through the ICT sector. And so the call centers that you might or may not be familiar with, sort of classic business operations outsourcing, where whole processes are outsourced to countries where there are economies of scale and also lower costs of labor. And so what I would like to focus on today is among the newer trends that we see, microwork and virtual employment. So why talk about this at all? Well, because it is emerging and we cannot ignore it as a phenomenon that is just increasing. These are numbers for you on hours worked on a virtual employment platform called Odesk, and the salary, the wage growth. And you can see how it's just significantly jumped up in the past few years. So within this, within virtual work, I'd like to talk a little bit about something called microwork, because I find it particularly interesting because we talked about the gentleman before who just became a millionaire, but there are also youth who do not have access to high-tech tools, to the kind of education and so forth, who are more towards the bottom of the pyramid and have mid to lower skill sets. So what about them? So microwork offers an opportunity whereby people who have lower to mid-level skill sets with basic tools, mobile phones, or some access to the internet can earn income. So how does this happen? So think about larger tasks. Like we talked about a little bit about BPO, like larger processes for businesses, and breaking those down into smaller pieces that rely on human intelligence. So a computer cannot do them. And outsourcing them, dispersing them through mobile networks, through the internet, to micro workers who can complete these tasks and get paid on these tasks, and thereby the companies, the clients, in the end achieve cost savings, and these guys get some discretionary income. So these platforms that do microwork have been emerging, and there are various business models, non-profit, for-profit, and so forth. These are some examples. Amazon Mechanical Turk was sort of the first and most notable example. But then there are various other organizations that also increase attention to some basic training or provide infrastructure and tools for some of the workers to make it easier for them, in particular those at the bottom of the pyramid, and so forth. And so, sort of to break down the value chain a little bit, there's the micro worker that we talked about. There are the aggregators that collect these micro tasks and put them on the platform. And they often the same or a different organization as a service provider that does the breaking down of these larger tasks. And there you have the client in the end, which can be these larger IT organizations, larger ICT organizations, as well as nothing to do with ICT, or even small and medium-sized enterprises that want to save money through their business operations. So microwork can help assess the challenge that we're facing today, whereby not just in the developing world, but even in the developed world, we are facing an issue of unemployment, in particular among youth. I mean, look at Europe, where I come from. It's stagnating. And so microwork does, because it's ICT in general is amenable towards youth, and because this is also even at a lower skill set where the barriers are even lower for entry, it's an interesting opportunity to examine and how it can be applied and supported in a way to help mitigate the problems that we're facing today. So what are micro tasks? What is the type of work that that is done through microwork? Now this is through Odesk, so some of these are more high level and fall into sort of online contracting segments, a little bit of higher level tasks as well as lower level. But for instance, some of the most basic tasks can be image tagging or recognizing a sentiment on a face or verifying a point of interest or a price of a good in a certain area, translating a word, transliterating a word, to sort of actual content editing and design work, which are a bit more complex. So it's a global phenomenon. I mean, a lot of it came out of the United States, in particular from Silicon Valley, but now it's all over. And so increasing, it's not just from a point of view of where the workers are, but actually emerging economies are now providing these jobs as well, these tasks. So what are the key factors that we should take into account when we're considering virtual work more general, especially from a policy perspective? And as I work for the World Bank, this is sort of my World Bank hat in terms of the policy advisory that we provide. So on one hand, payment platforms. So how are these guys getting paid for their work, especially when you think about micro tasks that usually take, just a few minutes to complete, and you can do a great number of them throughout the day. This is something very important to consider. And it really ties in with some of the underlying regulatory framework in these countries and the systems that exist. For instance, is there mobile banking? Is there PayPal? And so forth. Then basic infrastructure, connectivity, mobile penetration. I mean, in particular with mobile, when we think about it, more people have access to a mobile phone than to toilets, which is amazing. But then when we move to the sort of higher level tasks, you really do need internet, at least mobile broadband, which is increasing, especially in the developing world. But this is something that we need to enable to support the growth of this sector as well. Human resources, skill sets, labor regulation and labor laws, taxation, etc., that all come into place that you have to think about. It's interesting that online work is great, and obviously I'm a big proponent, but in some cases it can lead to the increase of the informal economy, and people they figure out ways so that they're not tracked and so they don't end up paying taxes. I mean, in some cases, like in Bangladesh, actually the country abolished taxes on online work done for clients abroad, and I mean formally that has led to a significant growth of the sector. But who knows, how much that growth actually happened in reality, how much of it was really informal beforehand, and that now it could be formalized because of the taxation evasion. And so the last sort of category of factors is appropriate roles for different players, private sector, public sector, community organizations, in particular if we're talking about those at the bottom of the pyramid, those that need some level of access to basic infrastructure, some level of training and so forth. And what's appropriate, if the government gets increasingly involved, will this be sustainable over time? So this is something interesting and important to think about in each and every context. So in terms of some of our work at the bank, this is also an area that we're trying to understand better. A lot of it is there are grain zones, and there are publications and studies and so forth inside and outside the bank, but really there's very few publications and studies and research publicly available that really assesses the sector in a comprehensive way and has some good, solid data that's updated. So this is one of our ambitions, to try to do a better job at that as well, in terms on a sort of general policy and knowledge level, and in specific programmatic level. In a few countries, we looked at the application of microwork and virtual work and the enabling environment. So in West Bank and Gaza, huge mobility restrictions, very high unemployment, in particular among youth. So we conducted a feasibility study that assessed what could be done, what couldn't be done, and so forth, what should be the focus recently, which is now published online. In Nigeria, we're working with the education team in various rural areas to assess microwork, to raise awareness about microwork, because often a country is fortunate enough to have the enabling environment there, but people are unaware that they can actually leverage these opportunities. Then in Jamaica, it was part of actually a larger event that took place in June that focused on youth, and because of the high youth unemployment issue and the lack of domestic job opportunities for youth and income earning opportunities. And so it was a part of a more comprehensive event, and it was really a workshop and a basic training around virtual work. And within 2 months, 2,000 Jamaican youth just signed up on these microwork platforms, and it's projected to grow to 50,000 within 3 years. And so, as I mentioned, we are doing some more analytical work and understanding. And in the case of Jamaica, this happened quickly, and you saw quick results. But in some of the other countries, more work needs to be done on the enabling environment, and also from a programmatic perspective, on the design of the whole program. And that is very important, because all of these organizations and platforms that I mentioned have slightly different design, and in particular those that really wanted to increase their footprint in developing countries have had to do a lot of work to tailor the whole design of their program, but also the user interface and so forth, to make it as easy as possible for the workers to join and for their clients to submit these tasks and jobs. So that's all for me, and then I look forward to your questions and the other presentations.
Thank you. We transition now to, please.
Seriously taking notes. Raise it up.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Great. Hi, good evening. First, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. And this is ICT, and especially its focus on education has always been a passion rather than a profession directly. So it's great to have the opportunity to talk about it. So before I start off my presentation, I wanted to take a minute to talk about the sociological, or the feeling, or the aspirational aspect of ICT in developing countries. And one of my experiences with that came when I was writing my dissertation, which was on female domestic workers and the effect of globalization on them. And while interviewing them, one of the first things they said, that one of the things that they save up for is to buy a computer. And when I asked them why a computer, of course, they said that it's so that their children would never have to do what they're doing. But it's also because they aspire to use the computer to access knowledge and opportunities that they've never had, in the hope that in a few years' time they will be able to transition and grow. And one of the things that they all mention is that vocational training that is available, or access to vocational education that they can access through ICT channels that can possibly help them even set up their own businesses. So having that as a background, the first thing we can talk about, and this is a recently published article, is in a country like India, or in many other developing nations which are transitioning and growing very rapidly, one of the main points in concern is that main points of concern is that we require highly skilled professionals in certain more basic infrastructural sectors. And in a country like India, we're rapidly finding that because of the sociological aspirational aspect of that ICT and IT has created, there is the shortage of jobs, the shortage of skilled workers is only 5 million in the ICT or in the IT sector as compared to the 33 million in construction. So despite the growth in development and the growth of the job market, the country is extremely sadly disbalanced in what it requires and what it can offer in terms of its own skilled workers. Now, while 5 million deficit in the tech sector sounds like it's a lot or not, you will find that that there aren't actually enough jobs to support all the people who are coming up and they're qualified in IT. So what we're heading towards in at least in India is a bit of a demographic disaster. Oh, okay, I'm not sure what happened to the slide.
It's a disaster.
Disaster. But so if you look, so what I'm trying to illustrate in this slide and what you can see is a basic pyramidal structure which explains how people use and approach ICT. So obviously the base of the pyramid, the largest number of people are all users. They are not developers or even operators. So they know how to use the computer, they can browse, they understand it, but they haven't made the transition into being able to use it as much more fruitfully as required. Now, the idea behind a lot of the current government policies and a lot of work that the non-governmental sector is doing in India, for example, is to move people towards the ICT creators and innovators, people who can not just use the channels or use the access, but actually use it to create further resources and create further employment opportunities. So when we move into the space of entrepreneurial the contribution of ICT in creating entrepreneurial individuals, we see that there are three kinds. There are the low-income people who either set up a mobile charging center because they have access to a mobile telephone and an electricity source, which is incredibly popular, and I can tell you countless number of stories of young people who are attempting to put themselves through school and college by running such a center, or a call booth. The second one is middle income, which is people who are working in call centers, BPOs, who know how to do the basics, but will probably never make the transition to the next level, which is the high income, which is again income generation and knowledge generation and research and development. Now, this is worrying in context again of a developing nation because there is the need for innovation, but most of the skilled workers in the sector are getting stuck in certain defined jobs instead of being able to make the transition to innovation. Okay, so this is actually a very, very old set of recommendations. I dug it out of some papers, but in the year 2000 or 2001, and there was a high-level recommendation by the Youth Employment Network, and I'd like to actually draw your attention to points 1, which you can't read, but which I'll read out to you. You know, you shouldn't do the Mac to window back and forth transition. I've learned my lesson. The first point says, giving young people opportunities to develop ICT literacy through the education system and or ICT training facilities, and to provide them with affordable access to computers and the internet. This is, 12 years ago. And sadly, we're as close today to this recommendation as we ever were. This is as applicable today because policy hasn't gone as far as to actually truly diffuse technology through the system. So yes, mobile penetration is extremely high, but there are still far too many people in far too many places who are still depending on the radio or the television at best, or even not that because there's no electricity. So one of the main struggles with most developing nations, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the diffusion is very low. And And then the third point, which I think you can read, which is making greater use of both new and traditional information and communication technology. And this is the trick, or the bit that some governments have done great work in, which is having classes offered through their governmental channels, which actually the Indian government does a fairly good work with. They have satellites for education. Or the case study that I found out, which is one of my favorites, which is the Digital Study Hall. They found that there are really great teachers and mostly really, really bad teachers. So what they did was they recorded the really good teachers' lessons, and they couldn't transmit it online, so they put them on DVDs, yes, and they sent it around to all the other schools. And actually the reach has been incredible. There are a few thousands of schools in very large parts of India which have benefited greatly from this. So it's also about intelligent use of ICT, and not just defining ICT as computers and the internet, but realizing that in a place and a space where diffusion is so low, it's important to be able to use the resources that you do have. The next is, however, as always, and competition, it fosters growth. So on the one hand, you have mobile telephony, and that penetration, and what a mobile telephone has been able to do and can do is incredible. And that is an example of a platform that has succeeded very well. So I'm going to concentrate a little bit on platforms of delivery and content design, and the importance of both, and revolutionizing both in order to truly dissipate knowledge and the skills therefore required to be sustainably employed. So on the one hand, you have mobility, which I don't need to explain, and the other hand is content. So content figures both government or local content, which I've described somewhat, satellites, radio channels, and the television, and private or global, such as Khan Academy or Code Academy or Coursera. And what these private channels have done is they're giving people access to almost the same amount of knowledge, but they're doing so privately, but they're doing so free, which is also what makes these more sustainable than a lot of other courses which you need to pay for. So, innovation and policy. There are several platforms that governments have invested in, but there are two spaces, and there's an example of a public the government, and then a non-profit or the civil society who are doing internet-based outreach, and this ties directly into the attempt to engage the youth. On the one hand, you have the Indian Planning Commission, one of those old bureaucratic bodies with people who still struggle with SMSs, and they're having a hangout. And they had this 2 weeks ago, and I was live tweeting, and it was hilarious to see how confused they were about what to do. At the end of the hangout, there was a lady, a very, very senior economist, and I have immense respect for her, stood up and said, but they didn't bring up minority issues. Oh, are we still live? Are we still live? And there are a few million people watching this. So on the one hand, you have these immensely knowledgeable, qualified people running a country who are entirely not acquainted with the methods and the channels to get to the youth, which is what they need to do to get to the youth to create any kind of sustainable change. So we do have some attempts in that area. The other are actually very, very small nonprofits, and I only came across this because I was working with Google on their nonprofit strategy. Was an NGO in Kolhapur. Okay, it's in Maharashtra, it's small, it's almost invisible, but they've been using Google Hangouts for years, to give access to better teachers for their students. So there's a lady in London who's teaching these kids art and math, and the feedback was amazing because they were so engaged and they were learning so incredibly fast. So the problem here is there is great work being done, but it's being done in silos, and they're not aware of each other, so they can never combine forces and make a little Justice League and do the right things. So it's important in this case to be able to, quote unquote, track down best practice even within a developing nation. I'm sure you all know this gentleman, or do you? Great, Sugata Mitra, a recent, very, very recent TED Prize winner. The Hole in the Wall project, absolute sheer genius. I don't agree with everything he says, but the project is amazing. Stuck a computer in a hole in the wall in a slum in Delhi in 1999. In 2 months, illiterate children taught themselves how to browse, learn, started inventing things, started designing. Absolutely incredible. Same thing repeated with Tamil-speaking children in southern India, biotechnology lessons in English, and they taught themselves. What this points to is not that either teachers are obsolete or schooling is obsolete, but what it points to is that there are newer learning methods and engagement methods that we have not explored as yet. And so I've said a little bit about the SOUL, the Self-Organized Learning Environment Toolkit, which works really well. So people like you and I, sitting wherever we're sitting, connecting with groups of children in classroom via a screen where we don't need to physically go there, because good teachers almost never go where they're needed the most. So we need to bridge that gap, and using technology in really, really innovative yet simplistic ways could possibly make that happen. Okay, so this is my favorite bit. It's about training the trainer. There is nothing wrong with teachers. They're doing all the right things, except that even age where we are learning continuously, when we forget the name of a book, we Google it, and that's actually learning. We don't mark it as learning. We don't record it, but we are learning, so we're learning continuously. And in an age where everybody is constantly looking at a screen, perhaps books and lesson plans do not have the same appeal anymore. Therefore, they can neither engage people anymore or even help them develop the critical thinking and analytical abilities that we need to combat the most recent challenges that we face or the innovation needs. So there are 3 recommendations here. So developing an evolving virtual learning environment. There is absolutely nothing like pure-based learning, and probably we learn best when we learn in a group, because we learn from each other and off the back of each other's knowledge. So being able to develop that in a very global manner, and ICT is about the only thing that's going to allow that to happen. Now, institute a program that will create value in perpetuity is slightly more complex, but in a way, it also indicates, or it points to the fact that programs can be created in a very foundational level and then allow pure-based input to keep evolving it as we go. And multidisciplinary understanding through peer learning is fairly self-explanatory. So what we have now is a good curriculum in education itself is not the recipe for success. The idea is to go from teacher or instructor to mentor or facilitator, because it's absolutely only when teacher is rather guiding you than teaching you what you should learn is when children learn the best. So this again, 2001, and I've only got these slides because it shows how far away we are from where we should be. So on the left, you'll find 5 bullet points, which talks about what is required to implement a system of, ideal education, if there is any such thing. And on the right are, again, bullet points that marks or points to what we require in order to accomplish it. About cheap technologies, you have revolutionary ideas like the Akash tablet, 100 rupees worth. That's $2 for a tablet, or was that 10? $2 to $10 for a tablet, accessible to every school child, every young child. It's revolutionary. It hasn't happened yet. The company's probably getting sued. I don't know. DataWind is probably getting sued. They've been given the final deadline. But how do we move from a company that's about to get sued to actually being able to affect that change? Number 2, collaborative thinking, inclusivity, and rapid adoption. So again, not working in silos, to use ICT to actually combine forces. Inclusivity. For example, the government's attempt to include the youth in their policy-making process, whether it's organizing a hackathon to get school children interested in the 5-year plans, which is happening I think the 6th and 7th of April, or a Google Hangout. Deregulation in formal economies and unrestricted intellectual property. So there are a lot of proponents on either side of this, because the minute you hear the word deregulation, there are enough people who will stand up and jump and scream. But the idea is that knowledge has no, shouldn't have an owner to it, and that knowledge is universal. And the only way this can, and the way this is proved are by channels and access points such as a Coursera or a Khan Academy, which do not restrict it. Mentorship accelerators, incubators, it all falls in the same sector, as the same space as teachers moving from instruction to mentorship. And design thinking and problem solving, which is local content and application. So there is no top-down approach, we all know that, but it's also by being able to customize content and delivery platforms depending on where you are working in. And yeah, there's my 2 bits. I'm sure there's nothing particularly challenging or anything particularly innovative about this. But one of the things is not to restrict ICT to I will teach you how to use a computer, but making ICT so much a part of a student's curriculum and learning on a daily basis that critical thinking or that innovative thinking is automatically in their system, so that when they translate in the job market and their boss wonders why they can't solve a problem, well, there will be no question. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn now to Samuel. Your roll call, please.
Thank you so much, and again, congratulate everybody for coming on this Friday afternoon. It is a showing of enormous interest to take time away from your transition to the weekend. Again, my name is Samuel Srafel, Manager of Technology Partnerships at the International Youth Foundation, and we work in a range of ICT for D spaces, ICT for education, are increasingly sort of looking at employability opportunities, leveraging ICT both as a training or a skill set, but also doing other work, leveraging it as the mode of communication within programming. In general, I think I'm going to be repeating some of the themes that have come up here. I'm going to go ahead and switch since no one is here. But in essence, I think from an implementer's perspective, whether you be a donor or again an NGO, I think the tough part about where we are now and in the ICT for D space is really trying to figure out where we are as a development community in this ecosystem. As was stated earlier, we have a lot of various levels to be working with this, whether it be on a policy level, looking at various other stakeholders. And I'll speak in most of my comments today are looking at it from the prism of an implementer who's really trying to figure out the best way about rolling out whatever the ICT for D initiative is. And in particular, one of the really most important things, I think, is looking at ways to move away from the actual tool or tech that falls on your lap for the program, and really focusing on the process by which you go about delivering that. And I'll sort of highlight some examples based on our experiences for that. And this is really important because I think a lot of times we really focus on the what but not the how, and then at the end we get actually fodder for a lot of these fail-fairs that are really great to attend to, but I think at the end our intent should be to have no one presenting at those fail-fairs. And so some of the key lessons that we've come about from our experiences have really looked at a couple of key areas to keep into consideration when deploying out, let's say, an ICT for E project. And in particular, the first one is sort of content creation. I think you mentioned it during your talk. And that really speaks to this notion of how do you manage the need to deploy out whatever existing global curriculum or material or training you have versus the issues that always come up around localization, local relevance, and the like. So, and these are all issues that we face and are solely creating systems around, but are things to take into consideration. So for instance, in one of our ICT for E projects, Bridge IT, at launch, we did start with sort of what we could say customizing an existing pool of content to make it in the local language for Tanzania, but ended up developing over 100 locally developed videos that were focused around providing educational material around math, science, and life skills to young people in Tanzania. Again, and also around content is to a theme that you had mentioned, thinking beyond just content in the normal forms, whether it be whatever the hot topic is for the day. If we're currently always thinking about mobile, ICT should be thought about more broadly. How do you integrate and intersect various modes of communication over the technology ecosystem, so to speak, whether it be through mobile, through traditional internet, television, radio, figuring out the interplay between all of these various modes of communication to really develop something that's robust and effective for your local market. And a lot of these you'll get at really by the second main point in learning is in the design process. I think you spoke to it towards the end of your comment, and that means what is the process by which you're actually developing your local content? Because at the end of the day, when we're on this side of the Atlantic, we are going to miss a lot of the nuances and key attributes of the audience that we're trying to reach, whether it be out-of-school youth, folks that are either rural or urban, different levels of language proficiency, and or just really aesthetic attributes of whatever content you're trying to develop. So what is the process by which you include local stakeholders, communities, teachers, other individuals that really understand that market in order to make something that's really relevant? Third really critical piece to the ICT for D, or even looking at in terms of the increasing, I guess, interest in trying to identify youth employment is who are the people that really are your audience within this program. For instance, if we're talking about an education initiative, how does the local school committee and district offices really play into the rollout? If it's an employment type of initiative, how deep is your labor market assessment? How much input have you been able to sort of gain from folks who would be really the target receivers of whomever the Youth Employment Initiative is targeting? If it's more of an entrepreneurial initiative, what kind of client base do you think would be your beneficiaries in market? And really thinking about how they interact with whatever programming that you're about to develop. Being cognizant, again, around physical equipment. We all know, and again, this is sort of on a country-by-country basis, different countries are facing higher levels of mobile penetration, broadband penetration, even now the move to digital television. Different countries are at different levels with that. But now also, as you think about where geographically within a country a specific program will be deployed, what is the difference between your urban setting, your peri-urban setting, and your rural setting? What kind of physical infrastructure is there to help deliver whatever content, whatever programming is being designed to that end beneficiary, depending on where they're located geographically in there? Who's there that can help maintain it once programming is finished? All of these are sort of like nuances that really go into the overall sort of planning stage that in a lot of cases at the onset are missed but end up coming back to really impacting quality. Platform, I think you spoke about Coursera and a few other platforms. Platforms are, again, really critical in the sense of the software platform. A lot of times we're thinking about whether it be skills training curriculum, education material, and content, but we forget about the digital house in which these will be stored. And it's not so much what is the overall makeup of that platform, but again, thinking about overall the life cycle of that, from development to support and maintenance. Again, I stress support and maintenance because in many cases we will throw something in there because it's working, but very seldomly really consider who will be around with enough capacity to maintain it if it breaks after we leave. Because if you have the winning gold content, but the platform breaks, your recipients won't be receiving it. So again, really thinking about platform, again, with the different modes of communication, again, you have with mobile, how do you transition your particular content? What platform can support that sort of transmedia component that can help deliver content through the various mobile, whether it be broadband and or facilitate even within mobile feature phones to smartphones to very low-end phones. Keeping that in mind and keeping that sort of front and center towards initial rollout is a critical piece. Really, I think increasingly, I think when we look at, especially in the developing emerging markets, a key partner that can help even address some of these with us, help us as we navigate this, that's I think something that as practitioners we increasingly find ourselves working with, but don't really consider them up front, are mobile carriers. Really, the mobile carrier in an emerging market is what the road was or highway infrastructure was, or it needs to be today in a lot of cases. These are the players in the countries that are where the majority of the population is. I mean, we exchange stats about overall mobile penetration and ownership, whether it's the number of people who own it or share it, but at the end of the day, they're getting their information through a network. And so the network is about as a strategic partner as you're going to get for whatever initiative that you're working on. Even if you're thinking about purely internet-based, but they are providing internet to locations in the countries where broadband and landlines, physical infrastructure cannot reach. So again, these are some of the learnings around key sort of critical elements that when you look at deploying ICT for D initiatives in employment or employability or in education, whether it be also for health initiatives that keep coming back up to the fore. Sort of switching a slight bit, another aspect of the work that we're working on these days increasingly is research. So sort of where the first part is looking at the ICT as a means of distribution, the other part is thinking forward in terms of researching the actual opportunities for young people leveraging ICT or ICT-enabled jobs. In a few instances, we've been fortunate enough to work on projects that look at the cross-section of ICT in the various sectors, agriculture and health. And some of the learnings that we found from those research, and currently we're undertaking another one now for 3 countries in Africa, is being able to sort of, again, look at the nuances of when we say young people and their employment opportunity, the nuances of what youth cohort we really mean. When we say young people, we kind of talk in broad terms. But again, taking into consideration, is this young person in a rural location? Can they connect with the micro-work platform? Or are we really talking about urban youth? What's the level of education? Are they out of school? If they're out of school, what is that profile of a young person which is really looking at survival and livelihood opportunities for survival, are they going to meet the prime person or the prime platform to do an O-desk type of work? If not, the question is also one that really forces us to not think in the either or, but also take into consideration the various profiles of young people within these realms such that we understand also what are the bridges between these various types of cohorts. So for instance, how do you get an employment opportunity or entrepreneurial opportunity, ICT-based or ICT-enabled, for a young person who is out of school and disadvantaged, and something that can help carry them until they can become sort of the prime target where a university, and they can rise up the pyramid actually from being a user to a creator to a developer. I think as implementers and programmers, we get stuck in our boxes of that cohort and try to work with an extreme disadvantage, or sort of target the upper side of it, the university folks who can do the iHub type of work, who can work in the, the co-creation labs of the world, but never really look at the interlinkages between the two. Because at the end of the day, we're looking at the iHubs being job creators, and the folks who are out of school maybe becoming employees or becoming, network providers within them. So we can't really get to that point in seeing the linkages if we don't first if we're not able to really segment and understand the attributes of the young people that we're working with. And we were able to find out, using this type of process, using this type of thinking, and working on the project that looked at the intersections between ICT, ag, and health, that there were a few different levels of opportunities for young people. So for instance, in health, you can go from something as simple as data entry to data manager. So the slight difference in that is, one is really the ability to transfer forms into a database. And then another youth cohort, another type of youth within that category, which may have higher education level, higher training and skills, can be a data quality manager. So being able to do QC on all of those forms. These are both youth opportunities in ICT, but are specifically targeted at the different types. You have folks who can do, again, sales leveraging ICT skills, whether it be something like the PowerPoint, and this would be like a nice tip for them about the Mac to PC transition. But then you can also have sort of the higher end. How do you enable a young person who's a part of a youth cooperative to leverage ICT to better manage the cooperative that they're working with? So these are, again, some of the outputs that come about from having a more nuanced approach to looking at ICT and young people.
Thank you. Thank you all for making my job so easy. You've pretty much taken care of the time each speaker has, and of course I've been very fortunate I am fortunate to moderate this panel that's so rich in ideas and in recommendations, suggestions, and of course I've been listening to it with my own academic biases, which means that I see some really fascinating trends, and overlaps in what you're saying. So before I open the floor for questions and answers, I would like very briefly to highlight just a few points that I really think are extremely important from these presentations, and I would like to ask all the panelists one question that really came up from all the sets of issues you're raising. So of course I appreciate the enthusiasm with which you're discussing the possibilities that come with the ICTs, and Cecilia has done a fantastic job at underlining the openings, the various ways in which we can leverage the technologies to create, to prepare young people to enter the market, whether it's formal or informal. But what I particularly found fascinating in your presentation, and what we should put as a recommendation, is that we really don't have a lot of evidence about how these things work. I mean, enthusiasm and hope aside, and all of these projects is something that everybody is thinking about. Just what is the impact? I mean, just what is the impact of employability? Does really employability create employment? And do technologies really facilitate, that transition from being unemployed or underemployed to, coming up with a viable, sustainable job? I think those are, fascinating questions when you sort of wondered, where are we? And I think that is something we need to keep in mind. Deepa and Rita, I just found your presentation fascinating because listening to you telling us we should be very careful to broaden the meaning of ICTs, it really should include the old and the new, and that is very true. And actually the history of ICTs in development, all the questions I'm hearing now are questions raised in the 60s. Not to say, that we don't know our history, but really it's the same concerns and the same hope. I mean, it's exactly the question, is it adaptable? What are problems of, access, and what can we expect? Are we raising hopes and expectations? And then, what happens with the diffusion of innovation? What should we be aware of? And there's been a consistency of hope and hope postponed, not to say disappointment in how much we can achieve. And I find Samuel's presentation great because you come into it from a different perspective, and it's the perspective of the implementer. And basically, like you said, it is the question of how do we do it in practical terms. I mean, I wish I had taken down all the questions you have raised, which are over 50, but they're fascinating because we really need to be able to answer them, at the end of the day. And all the points you raise are just absolutely fascinating. So that takes me to a question that I see probably that can tie all of this discussion. Unemployment, the scope of the employment is huge. And there are many actors involved in ICTs, development, youth sector. I just want to hear your thoughts about where do you place the other buzzword, partnerships. I mean, how about the public-private partnership? Many of you raised this question actually as you're thinking about, the World Bank, but also civil society. You're thinking about, there's so many stakeholders. IYF is known for thinking and working, through partnerships. What do we learn? What do we know, in terms of partnerships that can advance the projects we all have?
Yeah, that is the, I think that's where the art and science of development really come to play. When you deal with the ICT, especially for DR, employability sort of concepts, I see partnerships really around first understanding what are the roles and responsibilities and aspects of each partner that can optimize whatever the development outcome is. And I think without doing that type of self-assessment homework, a lot of times our expectations from one another, and then also our expectations of what the outcome should be, may not sort of match, for instance. So, I spoke a bit about sort of technical partnerships. I've spoke about local partnerships with regard to making sure the content itself is appropriate for the beneficiaries. But I think overall, coming from this side, whether you're a donor or implementer or NGO, critical to where we sit, I think, within this ecosystem again is we just so happen to be working on a daily basis to solve very acute problems faced by the same audience that, especially in the private sector, is increasingly interested in servicing. And I think many times we undervalue that. We undervalue the fact that we sit with and talk through and through a lot of the program design, logic framework and the like. We really are able to and should trust our own understanding of the local terrain and being able to deliver programming. Of course, there's a range to that, and there are improvements that can be made even within the development sector. But approaching any partnership, I feel as if this is one of the assets that really can add value to the private sector, and something that again can help inform the overall sort of end outcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You want to reflect on this?
I think I briefly mentioned the problems of working in silos. But when I think of public-private partnerships, first thing that comes to mind in the case of a developing nation is that the government often is the only singular entity with the reach that one needs or a project needs to actually ensure true diffusion. But it's often the private players or the civil society organizations that have developed the innovative tools to actually successfully implement change. So they have worked with a group or they've worked with a state and they've done really well. But it's only the government which can come in and ensure that diffusion or that elevation to policy, legislation, and then more universal implementation. So I think without these two coming together and in very significant ways, it'll be almost impossible to ensure any of those recommendations or goals ever get implemented. So it's
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, great points all around. I completely agree. A slight modification to your last note, and in some countries actually the government does not have the reach. It's the mobile networks that have the reach. Bangladesh, Afghanistan. So yeah, very much, absolutely. I think partnership is required, especially when we're talking about a development perspective, especially when we're talking about moving beyond short term to moving the youth, the cohorts. And I really liked your point on that. From one bracket, for a lack of a better term, to another, to move forward and actually have a greater impact over time, I think it's essential to form those partnerships and to have a very collaborative approach to these programs that are so cross-cutting. Mm-hmm. And really, I mean, going back to the programming and the design, how is really critical, and part of the partnerships and the roles and so forth are critical for that how. And so I think this is I very much agree with in terms of the first steps that you take when you approach such issues.
Thank you for your responses. We will take questions now. We will take few questions at a time. Please introduce yourselves and keep the question or comment very brief. We are ending the panel at 7, is that right? So we would like to maximize the number of questions, and we have a wonderful young volunteer here with technology. So please raise your hand if you want to ask a question.
Oh, I get to choose.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentations. So Deepanwita, am I saying your name correctly? Okay, close enough. I was interested in your recommendation and your vision for integration of more IT education and orientation in education systems. Do you have 2 or 3 organizations or government initiatives that you think are doing a good job at this, that could offer lessons learned, that could tap into the how for the broader stakeholders?
It's okay. Do you want to go one by one?
I wanted to take 2 more, and then we'll... Okay. Please quickly introduce yourself very briefly.
Sure, my name's AJ Doty. I'm a master's student in the ID program at American. And my question is directed towards you, Cecilia, but anyone really can answer it. So you're talking a lot about how income's increasing and wealth is increasing as a result of this, or at least access to some more higher incomes. And so I was wondering what other indicators are being used to measure if ICTs are successful in improving people's livelihoods, and whether if people have the same access, both young men and young women, if young women are able to have similar access as men are to these technologies, and so what that means.
3 questions packed in one. Can we have one more? Yes.
I would like to echo that. Thank you so much for the great presentations. I'm Megan Sullivan. I'm also a master's student, second year in the International Development Program. My question is about how do we go about ensuring that these micro tasks are also learning opportunities, ensuring quality within the opportunities that we're providing, so that the data entry positions do become those data manager positions. And sort of a secondary question to that is that movement only available to those who have like sort of the greater accessibility to more technology? Are we sort of creating disparity among the true bottom of the pyramid?
Thank you. Let's take care of these. Yeah.
Well, in terms of best practices, because it's not been happening for long enough for a true impact to be measured. One of them is the nonprofit that I mentioned very briefly, was Helpers of the Handicapped, and they have not just been using ICT as an access medium, but they've actually been enabling these differently abled children to use ICT on a regular basis to access better, broader knowledge spaces. So that would be one. The other one is actually the Finnish education system. They are very uniquely positioned in their not forcing children to adopt one sector or one stream of study as opposed to the other, and this is probably something that actually has some proof to it in that having worked. So the Finnish education system in general is unique in allowing students to study together. They try not to segregate between arts and sciences. They sort of give you a free flow, and that has actually worked really well. In terms of a government recommendation, another one, I know that the Indian government recently has made ICT or ICT-based education essential component, but the implementation is still very, very basic, and the Right to Education Act has brought in its other problems. But yeah, in terms of, I would say, government successes, ICT has, well, there are at least computers in most schools. I'm not entirely sure about whether it's delivering the learning required.
Yes, so on your question about indicators, so there are a large number of indicators that try to measure how ICT affects livelihoods. Now, going back to the topic that I was focusing on, although that in itself is still quite broad, I can still share some studies with you in terms of the GDP growth and what they've taken into account, as well as the employment. But I was talking. I try to frame it as an income earning opportunity, because essentially on these virtual work platforms, that's what it is. It's not a job in the classic sense of having your benefits, having that safety net, having a full-time job. It is in terms of full-time employment minus the benefits. It is for some actually, but that's a much smaller number than the overall millions and millions that we see stated. And so there are some numbers in terms of how it affects income, and it really varies based on the country context and the skill level. So, some people can actually earn a very decent living on this, and some people, it's just they have to do a vast number of tasks to get to that point where it's not discretion, it's actually, they can do well based on their income. Now, in terms of the men and women, again, this depends on the context. So, even general access to ICT, although with mobile more so than with internet. With internet, I think in general it's skewed towards men having a lot more access than women. But in terms of mobile, if you even look at just mobile, in some countries women actually have more access than men. So in terms of these platforms and how they are used, Amazon Mechanical Turk, for instance, in the US, more women use it than men. In India, about 30% are women. And generally skewed towards youth, meaning up to the age of 30, early 30s. And so they're not equally impacted, but it's really context dependent. And again, this is where we can introduce policies or programmatic work that can help support the integration of these different groups, cohorts, what have you. So, but if you want, we can follow up after in terms of studies that I recommend if you're interested in actually digging into the indicators and how they are calculated. Because even with the GDP growth and the job creation, you saw that I listed quite a few. So there's a range. And so the other question on the micro tasks, which is a very important question. And if you look at Amazon Mechanical Turk, it's provides no skills development, and really what it has produced, based on some of the academic research that I've seen and just from playing around with it, is that you have a highly skilled, not highly skilled, but sort of higher skill set, generally medium skill set of people on there who do quite well, and then a lower skill set that produces really poor quality work, and it's just the whole thing is a disaster. So then there are other platforms that try to introduce a development impact, but also there's a business sense behind in developing and creating a more vetted So not a purely crowdsource-based labor force, but somewhat vetted labor force in one way or another. And so there are examples to that whereby, for instance, Sama Source is an organization, it's a non-profit that had worked with Somali refugees, provided access to facilities and training, to help them, engage them in micro work. And the quality of their work was really interesting, comparatively speaking, with even micro workers in the U.S. because with that specific training and then access to ICT, they managed to integrate. They managed to catch up on the quality of work fairly quickly. And then other organizations use different methods. Cloud Factory, for instance, has a solidarity group, similar to microfinance programs, whereby they also the micro workers learn from each other and have a support group among each other and so forth. So there are different models that try to address this issue, and in particular around those that to avoid creating that disparity or increasing the disparity at the bottom of the pyramid, as you pointed out. Now, these are doing their work, and this is where we can also come in with some of the programmatic work to support their efforts. The challenge here is to make sure that it's sustainable, so that it's not just artificially boosted up. But again, there is a business sense also behind increasing a low-cost labor force and make sure that they're vetted so that your clients know that the quality of the work that you're going to produce is going to be good.
I completely agree. I think you covered all the key points.
All right, so it means we can take more questions. All right. Oh, you're supposed to. Okay, so help yourself.
I don't want to take advantage of my power here. My name is Sarah Elson, and I'm also a master's student at American University in International Development. And I just was at CIES and going to a lot of ICT education panels. And one thing I didn't hear this evening was a conversation about badges and the role that those play in the creation of experience with technology resources, and especially in regards to education and teacher training. I just wondered if each of you could kind of speak on that and how those could be related to the public-private sector cooperation and access to those badges and how they interplay with the local context.
Okay. There's one more there. And then, yeah.
I ignored her last time. I don't want to take advantage of your...
Okay. I think we can take all these questions and we have 5 minutes to respond to them. Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Caitlin Bowler. I work with TechnoServe, which is an economic development nonprofit here in DC. And so my question is either from an implementation side or more from the research side as well. But wondering if any of you have seen any effective models in which ICT and high levels of involvement of youth in ICT has been leveraged to kind of galvanize youth interest and youth engagement in sectors that are less sort of attractive to youth, such as I have a particular interest in agriculture, but for any as well.
Interesting. Yes, Sarah, and then we have one more here.
Thank you. I had a question that sort of relates to partnerships and some of the challenges. It seems to me that the way I think about ICT and the realm of ICT is of experimentation, product development, product refinement. You see the fail-fare is learning from what's working and what's not working. And then, the world I work in advocacy and policy and with governments and donors, where we're actually working in terms of foreign assistance with a very small budget overall, and a desire to have the evidence to ensure that our investments are going to pay off. I think there's an aversion to risk generally by most of the public sector and by the government. And so to me it's interesting to see this sort of growing excitement and talk of ICT and technology and the word innovation being used by our government and emerging in policies. And in fact in the new policy for youth and international development, ICT is mentioned specifically as a strategy. Are you finding that there's a kind of cultural disconnect between ICT and thinking and the community of ICT with the reality of risk-taking, and I think maybe a desire to see evidence, where what I'm hearing is that the evidence is still really being pieced together and we still don't have a full understanding of what it can do. I see an interest in ICT from the public sector often as, oh, it's affordable and will reach a lot more people, and we can do it in a way, that's going to be somehow easier. But what I'm hearing is that it's actually, when it comes to particularly these partnerships to make sure it has the reach that you were talking about, it's a much more complicated picture, and I just wondered if that's something you're encountering in your work.
Thanks, Sarah. Very briefly, please. We will do magic, like with 1 minute each. Respond to these.
My name is Dave Haft. I run a creative agency here in DC. We build websites, but I'm also a social entrepreneur interested in micro work in Kenya. So my question to you is, I'm seeing a connection here between the micro work revolution, if you will, all these service providers that are popping up everywhere, and maybe an opportunity that Samuel has identified here. So my question is there any micro work happening now, or are there some opportunities to reformat or develop from existing curriculums some curriculums for the mobile youth? So maybe an SMS platform, but using micro work to support that.
Thank you. Samuel, 1 minute.
Okay. Well, can you repeat it? So your question is there a platform by which, just quickly.
Well, just in general, what do you think the opportunities are for micro work to support some of the education initiatives that you'd like to see happen? Because it obviously takes a lot of scale and
well, I think one of the interesting things around that, I'll be quick, is again, one of the biggest issues that are faced in getting good quality content to a lot of these emerging markets is both contextualization in terms of their educational needs and maybe other imagery, but also language. And so this issue of how are you going to digitize, translate, and transliterate all of this content to make it accessible to even native tongue, or I think that, what is the proper terminology? I guess it would be mother tongue languages. So as we talk about literacy now, increase focused on literacy and looking at that as in the first language, your original language, but there isn't sufficient material. It's in English, or the pedagogy and other strategies. I think there's opportunity there amongst all the other public sector digitization initiatives. There's reams of data that needs to be made digital. Is this still me on the minute, or we should?
Yes.
Okay.
Pick up one question you can respond to.
Oh, okay. The other question that I wanted to respond to was in terms of galvanizing youth around things that they may not be interested in. I think that's where the broader notion of ICT comes into play, because really for agriculture, when the knee-jerk reaction worldwide is I don't want to be a farmer, but you really want to talk about value chains. You really want to talk about different opportunities of taking it from the field to the market, all the various players. That's really a social marketing initiative. But we don't have enough content that really plays to that and can show, whether it be through pictures, audio, video, and the like, these different opportunities to the young audience. So I think there's actually a huge gap to help in really marketing these existing opportunities, similar to like the construction opportunities, that there's a gap because it's sexy. ICT is sexy now. And it should be, but there are other opportunities that can bring food to the table if you present it in the right way to young people. So,
thank you.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to address the question about youth getting galvanized. One of the organizations I used to design strategy for worked with engaging youth with social issues, and we had a framework to do that. It was called Art Ideas in Action, Kala Kalpana Karm in Hindi. And what we did, we took really boring things like life-saving, and we designed really incredibly fun things around it. So we made a competition around it, for example. So the same strategy that we use to get somebody to like your Facebook page is pretty much what you do to get youth interested in this. So that was one of the things that worked, was pure marketing tactics. So just make it look, well, as Samuel said, sexy. In terms of partnerships and the risk, I think governments are realizing that they're sadly very, very far away from their young citizens. There's the massive gap. So not just in terms of age, but in terms of the way they think. But they are also finding that when something happens, like let's say the rapes in Delhi, or or the Arab Spring, they're finding that the youth are getting galvanized in channels and access in ways that they do not recognize or understand. So one of the reasons I think the governments are jumping onto ICT, everything ICT without even maybe properly understanding is because that's the attempt to get engaged with a very, very large percentage of the population, almost the determining percentage of the population. So yeah, and they've not got to the point where they're calculating risk yet. That'll be, I think that'll only come a little later. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Thank you.
Really excellent points. I have two great people to speak for me, so it's an easy job for me. A few points, being conscious of the time. On your micro questions, I wanted to add that I totally agree with everything you said. I just wanted to add a minor point that some of the micro work platforms do use gaming, and so introducing that into vis-a-vis especially the youth population here, segments of the youth population is also a very interesting element in terms of micro work and in education. Another point, aversion to risk. You mentioned that maybe ICT for D community is not realistic. I think it's the governments are not realistic. It's just in line with your points earlier, is that there's this rush to just adopt and just say, okay, ICT, but we have to be really careful about how it's done. And so there's little evidence in some of the things I talked about in terms of the income and impact effect of these particular trends, but within ICT for D there are various examples where there is evidence for something that has worked really well, and I wager money on that most of those programs that produced the real impact have very strong user-centric design components at the very beginning, have ethnographic research at the very beginning, which is labor-intensive and it's capital-intensive at the beginning, but it's just scalability is a whole different issue there. And youth engagement, yes. So when I started working with the World Bank 3 years ago, it was just before the Arab Spring, and I focused on the Middle East and North Africa region. And so after the Arab Spring, I was fortunate enough to be in a situation to help us engage in a totally different way and do things very differently. So what we organized for various sectors are these hackathons that really targeted young technologists, and to have them work with new governments and people that usually never talk to them in these countries. And so that was a very interesting experience. We started with water, which was an issue that wasn't much interest of people in general, and so galvanizing around that issue and raising awareness among the youth, in particular the young technologists, to work with us of this issue, and also raising awareness of their talent and how it can be applied to solving or to addressing segments and sub-issues under water resources management and sanitation was very interesting. And then we moved on to transportation and traffic, which in Cairo was not hard to mobilize people around. I'm happy to talk more about that, but I know my time is up, so.
Thank you, Cecilia, Dipanwita, and Samuel. Thank you all for being with us here. I think one word we're probably all leaving with is alignment. We need more research. We need more evidence to align our hopes with our money and our thoughts. All right, and on that, thank you very much again, and enjoy your weekend.
I might actually follow up with you to get some more.
I really don't have to.
I know. I'm not going to correct anymore.
Yeah, and then I'm really
That was great. Really appreciate you participating in this.
Good job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
These get fiery, you know. These things very. We're definitely. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's great. So I mean, we appreciate it. Yeah. There's something.
I mentioned that I'm in the International Development Program. This theme isn't particularly, I find it fascinating, and I want to learn more about it. The way this theme was designed was because I partnered with Sarah, and she was working in the youth field, so we're like, let's see how we do this.
Hi, I want to introduce myself. I'm Jody. I can see you nodding to so many things. I was like, oh, I'm not talking. Oh, no. I've been doing it. Oh, like, yeah. For many years. Yeah, I was just like, nothing changed. I'm like, I was showing this guy the other day. What I did. He's like, that's outdated. He was just a marketer. And he's like, what's outdated? I'm here on a fellowship. What we do is we take nonprofit professionals from around the globe, place them at different nonprofits in the U.S. It's a training program. So I actually work with the fellowship and I develop their learning management system. So I'm the training manager. So I basically, it's an online, offline curriculum development and also the platform themselves. So yeah, another company. Well, great. So how long are you here for? I just finished that month. I'm here for about the end of September. I might extend for a little bit longer, but definitely at the end of September to go home and like what a kingdom. It's going very well. It's incredibly inspiring because there's so many. We have about 155 fellowships from 60 different countries. It's ridiculous. Yeah, there are a few of them here. One time, the gentleman from Sudan, there's both money. So yeah, and it's been great, and it's been a lot of hard work. And and I'm we have a baby conversation. I mean, I was talking about intimate, but I'm thinking that